Welcome, and we'll start off with a bracha, and then I'll go ahead and share what we've got. Okay, so Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are doing the Rashi on Genesis, so we hadn't gotten very far with it. It took me a while to realize that, but that's what we're doing now. And yesterday we did the fourth day, and now we're into the fifth day. Vayome Elohim, right? Yishritzu hamayim shiretz nefesh chaya. So God said, let the waters, hamayim, let the waters teem with living creatures, right? Swarms of living creatures. V'of ye'ofef al haaretz, and the birds to fly on the over the land, al pnei rakia, be in front of the heavens, rakia hashamayim, the firmament of heaven. So just to make a note that the fish and the birds were created, according to this chapter, they were created on the fifth day of the 7 days of creation, right? So, Nefesh Chaya, here we are in the Rashi, Nefesh Chaya, She'ehei ba chayut, right? That it should have life. But the thing is that even plant life is living. There's no doubt that it's living. But I think of chayut as being sort of animated, as motion, something like that. That there's a level of animation that we're talking about of these kinds of creatures. Sheretz, so this word sheretz, kol davar chai, she'eino gavoha, any living creature that is not high, that's not tall. Gavoha min haaretz, gavoha min haaretz means it isn't high up off the earth. In other words, so like animals, like land animals and things like that. Karui sheretz. So he says that's what the word sheretz refers to. So it sounds as if Rashi is referring to, creeping creatures. On the other hand, there's another interpretation of sheretz as meaning to swarm, something like that. So, but he gives examples. But off in with flying creatures, kagon zvuvim, he says. So, for example, flies would be sheretz ha'of, right? But we also know that flies swarm. So there's some, it's a little complicated trying to understand a translation of this word sheretz. Bashkatzim, and regarding forbidden animals. And of course, here we've got sheketz. The word sheketz means basically something that's an abomination, something like that. But here we're going to reduce the heaviness of that term and say that it's forbidden animals. Kagon, and he says in case of those, we're talking about nimalim, we're talking about ants, uvechipushim, beetles, the tolaim, worms. Uve briot. So, for example, now he's talking about animals, right? Creatures. Kagon cholad, like a mole, v'achbar, a mouse, v'chomet, and a lizard or a chameleon. Ukiyetze bahem, and similar creatures. V'chol hagdagim, and all all the fish or the sea creatures are called sherets. But again, we know that they tend to, fish very often are in go in schools, so they also swarm. But of course, they're not going to have large legs, right, etc. So, at any rate, that's how Rashi is understanding this term sherets. Going on. Vayivra Elohim et hataninim, and God created the great sea monsters. Tanin sometimes refers to a dragon, but again, Hagdolim, the great sea monsters. Ve'et kol nefesh hachaya, and all living creatures. Haromeset, which now this again, we have the idea of you know, uh, how can I translate it? Remes, he'll explain this word, asher shartsu, and there's the word. So we've got this sheretz and romeset. So again, we're talking about, insects, things like that, which shartsu hamaim, which, well, in this case, we're talking about sea creatures, right? Which I would translate like swarm in the waters liminehem, according to their kind, ve'et kol kanaf liminehu, and all winged creatures. So the word of is definitely related. La'uf means to fly. So all flying creatures, winged flying creatures, according to their species. Vayar Elohim ki tov, and God saw how good they were. How good they were. So let's go in here. Yeah, hataninim. So notice how this word is pronounced taninim, right? Sea monsters. But notice normally there'd be a yud here between the nun and the mem to indicate that it's pronounced imnim, right? As a plural. So this gives forth an agadah regarding these great sea monsters. Dagim gedolim shebayam. We're talking about huge fish or huge sea creatures. Shebidivrei Agadah, and he says, and now there is, in the words of the Agadah, legendary material, however you want to translate the word Agadah, hu Leviathan. It refers to the Leviathan, uven zugo, and his mate. Shebaram zachar nekeva, because he created them male and female. V'harag et hanekeva, and God killed the female, umalcha, and salted her, letzadikim, for the righteous la'atid lavo, in future time. So this whole point about this legendary material, right? This mythical material, lavo she'im yifru v'yirbu, because were they to be fruitful and multiply, lo yitkayem ha'olam bifnehem, the world would not be able to exist before them. So this is I would have to say, even if you're not familiar with it, it is a relatively well-known Agadah. Again, these kinds of stories, etc. I feel there's always a reason for these kinds of things, and very often they have something to do with deeper meanings, having to do with but exactly what, I'm not sure, whether it has to do, since there's a relationship of, the power and the magnitude of these animals, do they represent something, in terms of that. And the fact that, that it's the female is salted in the future time for as a meal for the righteous, is it talking about something very deep about trying to live a righteous life as opposed to a non-righteous life, and the rewards of righteousness and the ultimate triumph of righteousness. I mean, to me, if I'm trying to look for themes within this, and by the way, there's also another Agadah that talks about the great ox, the Shor Habor, which is this land creature, and that in some future time the two will fight each other. These two great monsters will fight each other, and one wonders if this is sort of a kind of entertainment for the righteous in the future. So again, what on an emotional level, what is this trying to describe, and what is this trying to portray? And that's the way I try to, approach these sorts of stories, these sorts of legendary materials, that there really is some level of human experience that's involved in these kinds of stories. Anyway, going on, and what proof do we have of this? Is there an allusion to this in the text itself? He points out that it says hataninim without the yud is written. And the fact that there is not the plural there implies that originally they were created plural, but that God removed one of them so that they were no longer plural. Again, is this trying to describe the potential dangers in this world and the way in which we, without recognizing it, how the divine power protects us, even though we don't appreciate it or perceive it. So just some thoughts. If you want to add your own thoughts, I'm happy to. Yes, Lauren, if you can come up.
Excuse me, I've got two question type things that are really not in the Rashi.
Okay,
And if you don't want to address them for various reasons, that's okay. I just wanted to bring them up.
sure.
One is, this is, we've already passed it over, but when they were talking about like Leminahu of its kind, it's
Yes,
interesting that in the winged fowl, it says its kind, and in the creeping, crawling creatures, it said their time, and
yes,
and I mean their kind, and I
right.
was wondering about that discrepancy. The
Yes,
other is about the word Leviathan, which it looks like it says here, Leviathan, and I
yes,
know that the tan is sometimes a kind of a noun
yes.
suffix, like it's used in a lot of names like Natan and Yonatan, and I'm not exactly sure what it means, but it's there a lot. And
Hmm.
and then that leaves the leave part, and I'm wondering whether there was any connection um, to the word Levi.
Yes. Okay, so interesting. I never, obviously, I've never given a thought in that sense. The tan ending that you're talking about is actually usually natan, which means to give, and it's very often a reference to the fact that these are understood. These names represent, God's gifting in some kind of way of this particular person, right? Yehonatan for sure would be, that's a reference to God, Elohim Yud He Vav He has given. So I think it's a reflection on the miraculous nature of creation, that birth and conception and things are truly, on a sense, a miraculous part of reality and an acknowledgement of the divine element within all of that. And so that's the Natan. Levi definitely means to accompany. So Levi Yatan, I'm not sure. I think, there's really something in possibly parsing the word like that. Does it have something to do? Gosh, I'm trying to think, in terms of this whole Agadah here. I'm not sure. I can't say for sure without having, seen some research on it. As far as this, so here liminehem according to their kind, and liminehu its kind, right? So I think, here we're talking kol nefesh hachaya or a meset, that's perhaps it's seen as a much larger category than uf kanaf, that is any winged bird, something, that it's seen as less of a broad category. Um, has it something to do with the recognition that the species of insects, and all those kinds of creatures like that perhaps outnumber in some vast way, perhaps the birds. I'm not sure. Just,
And
I think you're
is
raising interesting questions. Yes.
Leviathan mentioned anywhere other than here in Jonah?
You mean it's not
Or
mentioned?
Jonah? No, Jonah just says the big fish.
Correct, correct. No, I mean, certainly from this Agadah, the Leviathan is one kind of creature. It's a unique creation, as the Shor Habor is as well.
Because
And of
they
course,
do
it
seem to
doesn't find
connect it with a whale sometimes.
they do, because the word for whale is tanin, and because you realize that whales are monsters, right? They are, I think is it the blue whale that possibly is the largest of the whale species that's recognized. And when you compare the size of a blue whale to one of the largest land creatures like an elephant is quite small in relationship to the whale. So yeah, I mean they recognize these monsters. So yeah. But the Leviathan is one of a kind, certainly.
Of course, in the old days when there were species that are currently extinct, there
Yes.
were huge species, including
Right.
elephantine type species and others,
Right, right. It,
reptiles and
it's true. But you know, here's the point. Here's the point. The 7 days of creation doesn't represent creation of dinosaurs. And I don't think it does. And I think to me, there's this wonderful Agadah out there that says that God created many worlds before the one in which we live. And the world of the dinosaurs, to me, would be one of those worlds that God created before this particular world.
yeah, but I said extinct species
Right.
because
Hmm.
something like, these giant mammoths and stuff, some
Right.
of them did exist at the same time as people and
Right.
were
But the mammoth,
hunted.
right. My understanding, though, is that the mammoths were, again, if we're talking about prehistoric times, think of that very word prehistoric, because the very nature of the Bible, even though these early chapters of Genesis would appear less quote, quote, historical than once we get past Noah and into Abraham. My understanding is that we are talking about historical time. Essentially, the Bible is a historical, you've heard me say many times, it's not history in the classic sense of how we understand history.
But in that it's written.
It is, but nevertheless, it's a narrative and it is time bound. There is time
Mhm.
that is motion as opposed to mythical time, which is circular and totally, in a sense, reflective of the seasons, but where mythical human beings found their own identity with regards to the ancestors. So they themselves would either take on their own identity in relationship to animals or to the ancestral stories that they had. And so when we talk about the world, we talk about the year 5,700 and let's see, what is it? 8085, 5785, and that the world, Anno Mundi, that the world is 5,785 years old. I see that as a reflection of historical time, that we're not denying prehistory, but that the Bible and the narration of the Bible basically is looking at time in that regard, as far as as our recognition of historical time, as opposed to dinosaurs and the pre-dinosaur eras and all those things, and that it's reflected in that particular midrash that talks about God creating many worlds before this one. And that's because the world of the dinosaurs, in the words of the Mishnah, of the midrash, did not have Torah, whereas this world has Torah. There is a concept of Torah in this world, whereas the dinosaurs and all those other creatures would have simply acted on instinct, etc. There was no Torah in those worlds, and possibly prehistoric man had no concept of it either. So I think that there's a lot to think about in regards to that. Okay, let's see if we can plow on a little bit more. Nefesh Chaya, we're finishing up this Rashi, right? Living creatures. I don't think he has a lot to say about this. Here we go. Nefesh sheyesh ba chayut, right? So an individual, a soul that has life. And again, you know, the distinction, right? Because we know that when a person dies, the body essentially is intact, but it's no longer in motion. Excuse me, it's no longer animated. So that's the chayut, right? That there's a sense of animation and motion in this soul, in this creature. Let's take a little bit more. Vayivarech otam Elohim lemor. So this is the very first time we have this idea of bracha, right? Of blessing. So God blessed them, saying, Pru urvu, be fruitful. Pri is a fruit, as Rashi is going to explain. Urvu, and multiply, be many, become many. Umil'u et hamayim bayamim, and fill up the water in the seas. V'ha'of yerev ba'aretz, and let the winged creatures multiply over the earth. Let's take a look. So incidentally, Mashi points out that when it comes to creating, which is going to happen over the next day, right, on the sixth day, where we talk about the animals, they are not, he doesn't say that they're blessed. So anyway, here we go. He's commenting on Vayvarech Utam. He blessed them. So, by the way, this is also because it directly connects blessing with being fruitful and multiply. My understanding of the word blessing essentially is plenitude, that when you are blessed with something, it means you're never going to run out of it. That's being blessed. You have lots of it. Lefi, and so why? And here we go. Lefi shemechasrim otam, because they are reduced in numbers. V'tzadim mehem, because, and they are also hunted, right? They're hunted. This is talking about, of course, essentially the fish, right? Ve'ochlim otam, and they are consumed, they're eaten. Hutzrechu levracha, they required bracha, they required blessing. Ve'af hachayot hutzrechu levracha, and he notes out that even the wild beasts required blessing. They required a blessing. Ella, however, but they're not. So that's sort of interesting, even though they required it. Ella, but however, mipnei hanachash, because of the serpent, she'atid leklala, which in the future would require to be cursed. Lechach lo barchan. For this reason, he did not bless the animals, shelo yehehu bechlal, so that the serpent should not be included in this blessing. Again, Rashi says in just a few words, quite a mouthful here in terms of the concept, etc. But certainly we can see the possibility of extinction amongst the land animals, at least implied here. So just some interesting thoughts there. Pru, the word pru, be fruitful. Lashon pri, it has the meaning, it's the connotation of fruit. Klomar asu perot. In other words, if we wanted to say be fruitful, it means make fruit, make fruit. So the idea of being able to have children, right? The Rabu, the word Rabu, im lo amar ela pru. Had God only said, be fruitful, so the necessity for both pru and uravu, right? Haya echad molid echad. In that case, if he had not said, and multiply, one would give birth to one, velo yoter, and no more. Uva urvu, so this word urvu comes, she'echad molid harbe, the idea that one can now give birth to many, right? So, all right. Let's go on a little bit more. So, Vahi Erev, Vahi Voker, Yom Chamishi. There was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. Now onto the sixth day. Vayomer Elohim. So God said, Totsei haaretz nefesh chaya lemina. Let the earth sprout forth or bring forth living creatures according to their kind, according to their species. Behema, cattle. Veremis, again, we'd be talking about swarming creatures. V'chaito eretz, and other animals of the earth, land animals. Lemina, according to its kind. Vayhichain, and so it was, and so it was. Totse haaretz. So the idea of the land bringing forth, right? Bringing out. Hu Rashti. This is exactly referring, Rashi saying, to what I explained, Shehakol nivra miyom rishon, that everything actually was created on the very first day. V'lo hutzrechu ela lo hotziam. And so all that God needed to do, so that the bri'ah, that is the creation out of nothing, so to speak, all happened at that very first moment, right? And that in the course of these 7 days or 6 days, they actually then developed. The idea that they developed. And again, this allows us a lot more flexibility in terms of the days or how we understand these days as being, stages, that they really are stages. And the idea that creation takes place in this staged kind of way, but that everything is there initially at the very beginning, and that little by little, as at an appropriate time, things start to develop.
So
Which I, yeah, go ahead,
what
go ahead.
what that says to me is that when we say the motzi,
Yes.
we're saying that God put enough food there at creation to
Mhm.
sustain the lives of the creatures, including people,
Yes.
but it's up to us to, continue to be able to reach and process them in a way that we can consume them,
Right.
consume the lechem. I mean, I'm using the word lechem and not bread because it can mean food,
Right.
but that God, you know, put it all there at the very beginning, and we have to, you
Nice.
know, take it out, process it, divide it,
Right. So I
consume
think
it.
what you're actually bringing out, I think, is a very important conception as to the nature of our humanity, which is the idea of us being stewards, not owners, not rulers necessarily. But if we're the only rulers in the sense that we're responsible, but seeing our role as human beings, as stewards of creation, I think is what, in a sense, what I hear you bringing out. Let me say something else, though, since you mentioned Hamotzi. So here's the thing. I think it's actually a reference to human beings. And that's because if you ask, if we look at how God actually formed human beings subsequently, taking the dust of the earth and taking water and combining the two and creating the human form, um, it's flour and water, just like bread, etc. And even the yeast involved, which is this sort of sense of confidence, if not, which can sometimes become arrogant on our part, that we have that potential for arrogance as human beings. But I actually think that we are talking about how when we make hamotzi, that we're actually referencing the very creation of humanity, and the fact that bread is symbolic of that, which is certainly not unique to Judaism. The idea of bread representing the human beings in many powerful kinds of ways. But I really loved what you had to say, Lauren, and I think you're right, in terms of how it talks about our role as stewards. I think that's so important because, it's clear that the Bible and the Torah wants us to understand that we own nothing because we're here temporarily, and to recognize the temporary nature of our place here in life, and to understand our lives accordingly. So let me go on here a little bit more, right? There's just a little bit more. Again, Nefesh Chaya, he's commenting on this again, right? Sheyesh ba chayut, that it has life within it. And as I said before, because the comment is up here as well, that in other words, that there's a level of animation to it, that it's animated. I think that would be the right term for that. So here we go. Veremes. Here's this word remes. Haim shratzim. So this is referring to Rashi's understanding it as these sort of lowly creatures, right? Understood, I think, otherwise as swarming creatures. Shehem nemuchim, right? He's holding on to his understanding. They are low to the ground, right? Verom sim al haaretz, and I think he understands rom sim either as creep on the earth, right? I don't think he's necessarily standing it as swarming here, right? So I think that they're low down and that they creep over the earth. The near im, and they appear keilu nigrarim, and it looks as if they're dragging something. They're dragging. She'ein hulachan nikar. It's hard to recognize their motion, right? Their actual walking isn't very easy to recognize. So it's as if they drag over the earth or slither, right, on the earth, etc. So he says, Kol Lashon Remes. So he says, any expression of this word remes, vesheretz, and the word sheretz, bilshonenu, in our language, meaning, of course, medieval French, right? Como vrai, whatever that would mean, right? Whatever that French word means. And I'm going to stop here, and with God's help, we will meet tomorrow and continue with this here. Let's find out where it is. Yes, I think we're right here. Cafe. This is where we'll be tomorrow. Okay. And I'm going to stop the share. All
Uh,
right. Yes. Go
I
ahead. Still on record. Yes.
I was wondering, God had other worlds that He made,
Yes.
and then He finally decided to make the Earth and the humans on it. But what about the moon and the other planets and the thousands of millions of stars that have other planets? He must have made them too, and
Well,
we
he
don't even
does. He
know.
says yesterday we were reading about it. We were reading about their creation. Yes.
Yeah, and there might be other planets that have human beings on them
Right.
too.
Or other forms of other life forms. Yes. I mean, I think that's quite possible. But the Torah's concern, again, it's not a scientific treatise. What the
Oh,
Torah wants to do is to give us a blueprint on how to understand our own lives and how to go about in relationship to our Creator. In other words, and also, therefore, in relationship to the universe. In other words, what is our purpose as human beings? Knowing about information regarding other planetary systems, etc., is very interesting, right, etc., or whether there are other life forms out there, but it's not going to answer the Torah's mission, right? The Torah wants to be right there helping us to learn, right? The word Torah basically means instruction. So it wants to instruct us as to how to live our lives out in the way in which God intended. That, right? In other words, our divine purpose as human beings. That's what the Torah wants to do. So these other issues that are historical or geographical or astronomical, etc., they're only relevant in terms of how they answer that question. The Torah is not trying to be an encyclopedia. But what it does hope to do is to give us a full, detailed explanation of how to live our lives to the max and to make the
but
most of the
yeah,
years that we have.
yeah, but God said we have control over all the animals and
Well,
all the things that crawl,
yes,
and we also eat some of those animals and things that crawl.
yes,
But we as humans have control over them.
yes, we do. We do. And we're doing a great job right now with climate change.
Oh,
Yes,
that's right. You're
yes. But
right.
that's because we don't understand our essential role as stewards. Because if we're
Mm.
stewards, it means we have to be conscious and to make sure that we, you know, that we're responsible for what we're stewards. So,
Mm.
yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.